Hi everyone, it's Maqqi here talking to you on the topic of cluttering for Neuro Pride Ireland 2022. Um, some of the comments on screen there at the top are the kinds of things that tend to be the responses you get when you start asking people about cluttering, because it's not something that's generally widely understood or known about even. But it does exist. Not only does it exist, it is very definitely a form of neurodivergence, and it is very likely something that you will recognize and may well recognize in yourself as we move on through a bit of a description. So, cluttering. It's classed as a fluency disorder. So basically, it's related to speech, at least in terms of how it presents. It is distinct from stammering, or stuttering, as it's called in the US. They have some similarities, but there are distinctly different. There are clear differences in some of the features. There's two parts really to how cluttering comes across to other people. The first is called disfluency, which is essentially kind of a breakdown in the normal flow of speech that you might expect. So, the normal pace and pattern, the rhythm and pitch of speech, the intonation, and so on. The other is misarticulation, which is more to do with the pronunciation. So things like mumbling or tone, monotone, things like that, where the language itself is, even when it's actually flowing, if you like, the actual sounds themselves get garbled or mixed up or skipped. Now, there's no consensus on what the core features are of cluttering, for a number of reasons. Really, because we're not entirely sure what the actual underlying real cause is behind this. It's probably quite complex. But there are a number of characteristics, and they're reasonably well agreed on, even if we're not quite sure which ones are 100% at the core, if you like. Just give an idea what, how it comes across, if you like. Cluttering has been described as a flurry of unstructured thoughts spilling out in an unplanned way. So if you imagine a kind of a splurge of speech coming out, without necessarily having a clear path of from beginning of what's being said to the end and where that's going to go. So it can kind of like spills out and crashes in a way, if you like. But it's not just about a splurge. There's more to it than that. Some of the more obvious features are to do with it being glitchy or jagged or erratic. So as well as that machine gunning, as it's called, which is the blurt of speech, there are also delays, pauses, repeats, and so on. So some of the common characters, just to work through these, to give maybe a slightly more detailed picture of what's actually going on here. The core thing, the nearest thing to kind of a generally agreed core feature is speaking too rapidly to manage. Now, what that means there is not necessarily that the person is speaking at a high pace, that is commonly part of it, but it's that they're speaking at a higher pace than they can manage, either in terms of being able to articulate the word sounds or in terms of how they are able to keep track of what it is they're saying, where they are in what they're saying, and knowing where they're going to go with it next, if you like. Which, again, doesn't necessarily mean they're speaking super fast. It could be actually speaking at a pretty typical speed, but if they're not holding on to that, if that's going at more of a pace than they can manage, it's still going to have some of the similar features. consequences of that tends to be played out in terms of the following characteristics. One of those being distorted speech sounds, so mumbling or kind of hard to follow pronunciation of words and so on. Deletion of sounds and syllables and words, so you were talking about there losing pieces of the words in that charge of speech that you're kind of going through it a little bit faster and you're able to sort of actually kind of pronounce it kind of in a clear way. So for example, with this word syllable there, instead of saying syllables, you might say syllables, losing pieces out of it along the way. The other one is collapsing of syllables or words. So you might find in the case of syllables that a whole chunk of the word might be lost. So it just could be syllables, whole pieces of it being dropped out as you go along, because you simply can't frame the sound fast enough for the pace that you're working at. And again, that can mean dropping words out of the middle of sentences or even chunks of sentences out. Mixed in with that, I mean, this is a lot of kind of high speed stuff that we're kind of talking about here in terms of the way that speech is done. But mixed in with that are unexpected or kind of long pauses in the speech, which can turn up at places that you wouldn't normally expect in the normal flow of language. So it's like a break in the rhythm of normal speech. So it could be like that. Hang on, you just started talking, but you got this big long pause. What's going to happen there? It's that kind of oddly placed pauses in speech, which can often be quite a lot longer than you would normally expect in the course of somebody talking. And the other thing is that they can often be filled with what are called fillers. So things like or so, or like, that kind of thing, but much more so than most people would normally do, and being done on a regular basis, almost constantly throughout somebody's speech. The other thing is repetition and correction. Again, if you're going to go and rush in with kind of not fully formed ideas or taking a line on something that you want to talk about without thinking where it's going to bring you, you can find repetition of what you're saying, sometimes with a correction of what you were saying. So you may come at it from a certain direction, stop halfway through, go back to the beginning, take it again from a different angle, and so on. And a lot of these things are really kind of pointing towards language planning. Now, there are some prominent people who've studied cluttering who are kind of against the idea that language planning, on a kind of in your mind, if you like, before you even open your mouth and speak, that's even a feature of this. They're looking more at the way it's articulated. Honestly, I think it's an argument which is weakening as time goes on, I think. And it's more likely, I think, something to do with the way you plan what you're doing and how it actually comes out. Okay, so cluttering can arise on its own, but it also, not unusually, turns up in conjunction with other things. Common examples are dyslexia and dyspraxia, auditory processing issues, ADHD, autistics and ticking, including Tourette's. So, I mean, you're talking about quite a wide range of different options there, some of which have got planning and sequencing aspects built into some of their features. And you can see how there's an interaction going on there between them. Any other characteristics? Most certainly there are. As it suggests here, there are lists which can run up to 60, and some of them I think will even go over 60 items. Now, some of those are a bit, but there's certainly an awful lot of options here in terms of different variations of the kinds of ways this can present. And what may actually be going on there is that these are showing the interaction between cluttering and other features which may be going on. So the two interacting will maybe tweak the way this comes across, in a slightly different way, and it can look like a different feature, but it's really just something fairly consistent that's got a twist on it, if you like, because of something else that's going on. Is it a type of stammering? Some people think it is, but I think it's a fairly weak argument. And I think there's fairly clear understanding that it's really not. It's really something very distinct. And for me, one of the strongest arguments on that is that a stammer is very much a clear thought that's been framed in the mind, and it kind of gets snagged or caught on the way out as it's being articulated. So the frustration there is that the person has a clear sense of exactly what they want to say, and they're just not able to turn it into speech in a fluid way. Whereas cluttering is much more about having an idea of what you want to talk about and just letting it out before you've actually really framed how you want to present that. So there's no issue there with the fluency in terms of being able to make the sounds as such necessarily. It's just that it kind of comes out a little bit earlier than maybe it should have. And you then having to backtrack and consider how you're going about it. And you're kind of doing the thinking while talking, which is not a great way to go about being fluid. There's other differences between them as well. You can go and do your own research if you like and dig into that if you're interested. One interesting thing about cluttering is that very often people who do clutter are unaware or only lightly aware of the fact that they even do any of this stuff. They're not conscious of it particularly, and certainly not to the extent to which other people are aware of the way that they're talking. I mean, I found this with myself, that like even when I feel like I'm being reasonably fluid with the way I talk, listen back to a recording, I'm like, oh wow, I'm going to have to do that again because it's just full of overlong pauses, those filler sounds, so on and so on and so on, and actually repetitions where I'm basically saying the same thing 2 times, 3 times in a row, and it's like, this is totally unnecessary. But it didn't seem like that at the time. And the idea is that you kind of almost like saying what I wanted to say that was in my head. It felt clear in my head, but apparently when it came out, it wasn't at all like I imagined it was going to be. That mismatch is part of that, the whole kind of characteristic of what cluttering is about. And the kinds of clues that you can see that maybe you do clutter, or when people say constantly saying to you things like, sorry, can you repeat with that again? I don't understand you. I'm not following what you're saying. And also that this is to do with the long pauses in speech and so on, that people quite regularly assume you finished talking when you're only part way through and start talking, you know, kind of responding to what you said or kind of talking on the same subject or whatever. You're like, I hit a comma in the sentence, for God's sake, let me finish the thing. You know, the pauses are long enough, it sounds like you finished, but you hadn't. You were basically just catching up with yourself, if you like, which can be quite frustrating. Those are the kinds of clues that maybe it's something you maybe want to kind of dig into and investigate and see whether it makes sense for you. Because this is a speech and language processing and planning type of topic, if you like, that we're talking about here, speech and language therapist is absolutely somebody who is very well placed to talk to you about it, analyze it, pick out some details, and help you work with ways to sort of address that. But if they're not familiar with cluttering, then they may actually not be best placed. So, you know, if you're going to go and consider looking for an SLT to come and talk to you about this and maybe can give you some therapy on it, the support, just making sure that they are up to speed with cluttering and ways that it operates and the ways that may help with addressing it. Just make sure they're on board with what you're doing. But it's also something which is very amenable to a lot of self-help type approaches, such as simply practicing speaking slower. So pacing yourself at a slower pace, separating the words out as you're speaking, or speaking along with a recording. So it helps you sort of like realize how your speed of speech relates to the way other people speak when they're talking through something. And there are other approaches like delayed auditory feedback, which is something you can get via free apps. And you literally just put the earphones into your ears. What it does is you speak, and as you speak, it records what you're doing and it feeds it back into your ears with a slight time delay, which is literally counted in tens or hundreds of milliseconds. And just that slight delay coming back into your ears helps to slow you down, and it can actually help make a remarkable difference. Some people it makes no difference. Some people it makes an amazing difference. But those apps are free and definitely something worth trying out. So complicated in a lot of ways. Really just scratching the surface here, obviously. This is more about just saying, hey, look, this exists. Think about it. If you want to find out a little bit more, absolutely the best place to go is a website called toofastforwords.com. They also have a YouTube channel called, no surprise, Too Fast for Words. And I think the name says an awful lot about the nature of cluttering. But also on YouTube, there's a guy called Joseph Dewey who produced quite a lot of videos, but he clutters quite a lot while he's presenting on the videos, even though he's consciously trying to sort of like work through it and manage it. It's quite striking to see the kind of things that come through, even so, in the way he speaks as he's presenting on the videos. And that could be something which would be a great clue to yourself, maybe, as to some of the things that you may be doing yourself, if you think you may be cluttering also. So that's about it. Thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting. And if that's given you some inclination that maybe this is something worth looking into for yourself, then absolutely do go for it. Too Fast for Words, brilliant website, and they do have an online self-test on there, so you kind of dig in a little bit more detail for yourself if you're interested. Thanks a lot, and have a good Neuro Pride. See you later, guys.